Wir werden niemals kapitulieren. Unser Glaube ist stärker als jede Herausforderung. Unser Volk wird siegen.
In 1907, an 18-year-old aspiring artist arrived in Vienna. 15 years later, he was plotting the armed overthrow of the German state. The path between those 2 points began with a rigid, abusive childhood. His father, Alois, was a strict Austrian civil servant who demanded his son follow him into government work. Adolf resisted the plan, intentionally failing his classes at the local secondary school to force his father to let him pursue art. Relocating to Vienna, he applied to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts, but was firmly rejected twice. The Academy's director suggested he try the School of Architecture instead, but because he had intentionally neglected his earlier studies, he lacked the basic high school diploma required to even submit an application. When his orphan's pension ran out, his lifestyle collapsed. He spent his days in homeless shelters and a dormitory on Meldemannstrasse, barely surviving as a casual laborer and by hawking cheap watercolors of city landmarks to tourists. The gap between his grandiose self-image and his reality bred profound resentment. Rather than accept his lack of academic qualifications or artistic skill, he directed his anger outward, searching for external forces to blame for his squalor. He found immediate answers in the local media. Turn-of-the-century Vienna was saturated with German nationalist politics. He eagerly consumed local newspapers and pamphlets that aggressively warned of an influx of Eastern European Jews, absorbing a deeply paranoid, anti-Slavic, and anti-Semitic worldview. He found a highly effective template in the city's mayor, Karl Lueger. Sitting in the highest municipal office, Lueger openly utilized anti-Semitic rhetoric to mobilize populist voters and consolidate political support. This demonstrated exactly how prejudice could be leveraged for mass political appeal. By the time he left Austria in 1913, his worldview was anchored in intense racial hatred and a rigid belief in social Darwinism. He had identified his targets, but he possessed no practical means of attacking them. Despising the multi-ethnic makeup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he fled to Munich to avoid conscription. When World War I broke out in August 1914, he voluntarily enlisted in the Bavarian army. Stripped of his aimless civilian life, he finally secured the absolute structure he craved. Posted to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment, he served on the Western Front in France and Belgium as a dispatch runner. For a man who had failed to find a place in society, the rigid military hierarchy provided his first genuine sense of belonging. While he spent considerable time at regimental headquarters, he regularly navigated heavy artillery fire, surviving a shell explosion in his dugout. In August 1918, upon the recommendation of his Jewish superior officer, he received the Iron Cross, First Class, a rare military decoration for someone holding the low rank of Gefreiter. Years spent surviving the mechanized slaughter of Ypres, the Somme, and Passchendaele stripped away his civilian norms. Extreme, normalized aggression became his default method for resolving conflict. In October 1918, a British mustard gas attack left him temporarily blinded. As he recovered his sight in a military hospital in Pasewalk, commanding officers delivered the news that Germany had abruptly capitulated. Appalled by the surrender, he eagerly adopted a pervasive conspiracy theory known as the Dolchstoßlegende. This myth asserted that the German military had never been defeated on the battlefield, but had instead been sabotaged at home by civilian politicians, Marxists, and Jews. The trenches forged his second crucible. The localized prejudices he developed in Vienna were now armed with military discipline. The failed artist had become an aggressive soldier, thoroughly convinced that his nation had been stolen from within. Remaining in the army after the armistice, he returned to Munich. Military intelligence assigned him to infiltrate a small, radical anti-government group called the German Workers' Party. Attending these meetings, he discovered a highly effective talent for crowd manipulation. His vitriolic speeches energized audiences, allowing him to rapidly shed his role as an army spy. By 1921, he had crushed internal party opposition and secured absolute dictatorial control over the movement. This banknote shows a face value of 5 million marks. Following the war, the Weimar Republic buckled under economic mismanagement and heavy treaty reparations. wiping out the middle class through extreme hyperinflation. Looking down the image, denominations explode to 10, then 20 million marks. As citizens struggled to afford basic food, a terrified public that normally ignored political fringes became highly receptive to demagogues, blaming specific scapegoats for their economic ruin. To enforce his rhetoric, he organized the Sturmabteilung, or SA. These paramilitary stormtroopers operated as a private militia, securing party rallies and executing coordinated physical assaults against political opponents in the streets. In November 1923, he attempted to leverage this expanding private militia to seize the Bavarian government by brute force. The beer hall putsch ended in a definitive failure under police gunfire, proving that a mob of armed loyalists could not simply storm the apparatus of a modern nation. Arrested for treason, he utilized the subsequent trial as a heavily publicized national stage. He received a guilty verdict and a 5-year sentence to Landsberg prison, but the proceedings elevated him from a regional agitator to a widely recognized national figure. During his brief incarceration, he dictated the first volume of his autobiography and political manifesto, Mein Kampf. The text clearly outlined his plans for aggressive territorial expansion and the restructuring of German society based entirely on race. Sitting in his cell, he recognized the tactical failure of the putsch. Direct violent rebellion had only consolidated the police and military against him. To actually acquire state power, he had to entirely rewrite his methodology. He decided to put away the rifle and pick up the ballot. He would run candidates in elections, win seats in the Reichstag, and exploit the legal framework of the Weimar Constitution to secure high office. Once he attained executive power, he would dismantle democracy from the inside.